right, welcome to the Thursday stream. Welcome to the Thursday stream. Just gonna get rid of some of that audio there so I don't hear it. Okay. So, as mentioned in the life drawing, if you guys were hanging out during that, this week I'm going to focus on something where we can look at some stylization, some simplification of forms. I'm going to be working with a shot, a photograph that I took in the Swiss Alps, just so we can kind of look at something that's existing and we can kind of use that as reference for building an interesting scene, simplifying some of the forms to make it more stylized. So we'll walk through that. Hey, Chris. And hey, Kitty. Welcome back. You guys are very studious. I've got the tea going today because I've already had 2 cappuccinos. Wow, an espresso and a cappuccino. I can't drink caffeine or decaf even all day, so I have to resort to tea, which I don't love, but there you go. Hot drink anyway. Okay, so let's jump straight into it here, and we'll take a look at the shot itself, and I'll be cognizant today to whoops, move my stream back. There we go. Be cognizant today to move the canvas so that you guys and gals can see it a little bit better. So here's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a shot. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more here. I might kind of take up more of my screen. So this is a shot I took in the Alps, and a really beautiful day. It was a very interesting experience. We came up to this place to see, obviously, the beauty of it, but when we got there, it was all cloudy and socked in. And so we had come all this way. I drove a couple hours to get here. And so we went up. You have to go up on this gondola to get to the top of this mountain. You could hike, but that wasn't happening. And we just hung out. And then actually, as an hour went by, there's a little hut up there. And the sun started to kind of poke through and the clouds were breaking. And then we got this beautiful scenery. So this is the shot in here. So very picturesque. It was shot on a cell phone. So unfortunately, we zoom in on here. We see sort of like the limit to the resolution on that, but that's okay. We don't really need it to be super high res for us for reference. We can just make it something that we're kind of basing our stylization off of. I might make a few changes in here as well. Let's grab a brush. There's this little chalet down in the bottom of the valley and some interesting kind of landforms down there that these 2 trees are sticking up in front of. So I'm probably going to shift those around and get them out of the way. But overall, we've got some really beautiful forms, especially for stylization, to be using in here. Kitty, tea's the best. What are you on about? I don't love it. I just don't love it. I grew up on coffee, so I just prefer the taste of coffee bean versus tea, leaves, herbs, whatever. But yeah, I know I'm probably in the minority. A lot of people love tea. I don't hate it, but it's not my first choice. It is a little bit better for the voice, though, when talking all day like I do. Coffee, especially like milk coffees, like a cappuccino, they really kind of create kind of throat congestion, probably because of the milk, but oh well. I love it. I love it. Okay, so let's get back to this. The shapes that you want to start to look at when you're going to be using reference and kind of creating your own stylized work are all, they're always in the photos that you take or the photos that you're looking at if we're using real life reference. What you want to do when stylizing is not look at every little detail, every little piece, or say we're talking about the trees, every little branch as its own kind of independent detail. We would do that if we were making photoreal work. But when you're stylizing, what you're tending to do is simplify, right? Simplify things and kind of look for exaggerated forms, the trying to get the essence of what that shape and even the texture is in there. You'll see this a really great artist that you can follow. Well, not follow because he's not alive anymore, but you can look into. Is named Ivan Earl, and that's I'll just type it out here. Ivan. That's way too small for you guys to see. Let's try that again. Ivan Earl. And I'll make that bigger so that everybody can see. And Ivan Earl was an American illustrator, worked for Disney. You can see some of his work there's a book out there called Awakening Beauty, Awakening Beauty, and you can see some of his work in some of the earlier Disney animations like Sleeping Beauty. And so I'll let you guys Google that so you can take a look at that. But when you take a look at Ivan Earl's work, you can see that he's very much so kind of simplifying these forms into beautiful, simple shapes, squares and circles and conical shapes or pyramidal shapes, right? Triangles, really, and rectangles, that kind of thing. So, but then he uses that as a structure to fill in, say, the tree branches or the mountain top or the rock texture, right? It is very stylized, very graphic even at that point. So you can go that far. You don't have to go that far. Stylization can really be anything that you want it to be. If it's not photoreal, it's stylized, right? In some way, shape, or form. So we're going to go through here and we're going to kind of look at the rock formations, the trees, any of the hillside or the valley bottom in that way. Okay, so yeah, check out Ivan Earl. See what things look like for you there. All right, let's get back to this. Hey, Patrick. Okay. So when I'm looking at this stuff, I can start to almost pick that out. That being the shapes, these kind of basic forms, and if I'm being just inspired by a scene, then I can choose to, like we were talking about with the trees, maybe getting rid of the trees, that kind of thing. And I can also move the shapes around as I see fit. But just looking at what we have. But we can start with the foreground. I mean, this can be very, very simple. Let's grab a red. This can be kind of very simple in here. You know, that shape seems to be kind of this sort of curve that runs down through the tree line, and it feels like the hillside kind of disappears over the edge of that. The trees themselves, those are pretty easy. We can generalize those as these triangular forms, right? So we can see that go all the way through into the back, and they get smaller and smaller. In terms of the overall shape of that, though, we could probably do something like this to make that form in here all one big, large shape. When we get into kind of the distant areas in there, like let's just delete that and start to kind of home in on those guys. So this cliff in here, let's zoom in on that. That cliff's already very simple, right? It kind of has this sweep down into here, then it drops, and then we get another sweep. So, I mean, this is making it really easy on us because it already exists in this kind of very simplified form. I'm okay to keep some of these larger breaks in the shape and not oversimplify it. I mean, I say oversimplify, but Some people may think that that's, a fine simplification of that cliff face over on that side, if they don't want to spend too much time with that detail, or don't want the viewer to spend too much time with the detail, right? So you can see already that I have to make the adjustments based on what I want the aesthetic to look like, or how I want the viewer to read it. And so I'm kind of setting up almost my own rule set with this, so that, if I treat this shape that way, I'm going to treat these shapes over there this way, in a very similar way. So, okay. So we can see that if I were to generalize this one, we'd have something like that. When we get into the background, even with things like the clouds, we've got this really beautiful bowl back there, which is kind of this flat plateau, right? And then that sweeps up. So I kind of think of this as being kind of a nice sweeping curve in that direction. There is this little bump that seems, in regards to me setting up my own rule set, that seems like something that I would keep. I don't want my mountains to feel too like simplified and sculptural, minimized in its detail to that level. So I guess in that regard, I am setting up my own rule set. So I'm allowing the bigger things to exist there. One of the cool things in this shot, it might be a little bit difficult to see, kind of see it in the distance, is the formation that runs up this way along that broken face of the cliff. We see these kind of striations run up at an angle to the ground plane right down here. So that might be something that I want to pick up on later when I get into some stylization or some texture development with that space. It's this big, beautiful crepuscular ray kind of coming down into the valley, which I like. I'm going to deal with that closer to the end, because that's going to be, I want to make sure that the underlying forms are there first, right? And we sort those out. But underneath that, we can start to see these little fingers of trees sort of come down into the valley to the grass, or at least the kind of cleared valley bottom down below. So I can't really see it in there because of the nature of the lighting, but I can use these over on this side to kind of think about how I might deal with those forms. Okay, so I'm just kind of thinking about how those crawl up the hillside, maybe up into the cliff. There, we get a little bit of a opening in this side, and I'm just kind of sweeping through. Now, the trees are in the way in this section, so I'm going to have to kind of imagine what I'd want to happen there. I like the idea of at the base of this valley, and I know because I was there that there is a river that runs through. I would want to kind of pull that out a little bit more. So I might kind of play with this meandering curve that feels like that river is maybe kind of sweeping through there. And I'm going to have a lot of fun with that curve, right? Try and make it as rhythmic as possible. And then maybe what I'm going to decide to do is this little landform in here behind our trees is where we would have our little cabin. So I'm going to kind of move it out of where that lands here. I could keep it there, maybe just have big farmland out down below. But I'll see how it goes, see how I feel as I continue to build the piece in there. So I won't necessarily, when I'm looking at reference like this, I might have multiple pieces of reference. Today we're going to kind of just translate this into whatever we want. I won't necessarily be sketching on top to map that stuff out in my decision making. I'll kind of, for myself, be mapping that in my memory, right? A lot of the times. It's good to do that on the page, on a layer, of course, so you don't ruin the original photo underneath. But it's not entirely necessary if you've got a good memory for that stuff. For me, I've practiced stylization enough that I wouldn't necessarily need to go to that level. But it would still help me, right? So just coming through here, thinking about how some of these shapes are poking out, that might be a really nice outcropping there to work with. And then I just have to figure out kind of how I want to deal with the outcropping that kind of moves down this way, right? So it's it's something you got to play with and think about, you know, if am I going to have that shape? How does that shape look? Do I like that shape at all? Right? Maybe, maybe not. And then we get the kind of rock face down in there. As we come up to this other side, this is very sheer on that side. Let's get rid of that. This is very sheer, so it feels like there's kind of like a rounding edge up to here, and then it just dropped straight down into the valley bottom, right? And then we get the clouds over top. So I like that. I like kind of that sculptural form being kind of sheared off in there. So you know, we get the sense of that volume. So I might play up a little bit of the backside of this, poking through the clouds at some point. And then finally the clouds themselves, right? Right now they're not stylized, obviously, but I can start to pick out some simplifications for that as well. Let's actually grab a red. There we go. So just even starting to look at some of these things, I can think about those forms as being these kind of larger simplifications of themselves, right? So this kind of comes off of the mountain there. This might be something that I play upon here. And as I'm starting to stylize some of this stuff, I'm trying to also play with rhythm and variation in scale. So not everything's the same. What can happen is you can start to create shapes that are very similar, right? And if I were doing that, it starts to feel like a facsimile of a cloud rather than a believable cloud per se, right? So what you'd want to be doing while you're building in this simplification is keep an eye on that stuff, right? So if I'm coming in here, you know, maybe I have this interesting little cloud that wisps in through there. So parts of the cloud I'm really trying to keep small and then move to medium shapes and then large shapes and situate those things close to each other so that we get a sense of that scale difference, right? So maybe it'd be really nice to have something that's really big in here, for instance, and then have a cloud down in here that's smaller. You know, these guys creeping over the edge, I can just decide where some of that form kind of pulls through and what we see for that kind of thing. What I'll tend to do is I'll rough it out, right? As I go, I might kind of decide that some of that stuff needs to be changed, but that's the regular ebb and flow of the production in here. So I got a little bit too careless with the rhythms, started creating very similar forms, right? So it happens. I have that stuff. As that kind of breaks up, that cloud starts to evaporate a bit, we lose the edge of it, right? And that's clouds for you. Sometimes you get this really sharp edge of when the cloud is has accumulated, I guess, enough water vapor. And then sometimes when it just starts to evaporate, it fades, right? So the way I'm going to deal with that, and the way when you look at Ivan Earl, it can be a texture, right? The way you kind of paint the texture, and we'll get there. And we'll see that also with the trees and even the rocks, right? So I'm not worried about that at this point when I'm trying to kind of decide what those shapes will be. We'll make it happen. The book is $870 on Amazon. Oof, that is harsh. I swear it wasn't when the last time I looked. I'm just going to click the Amazon link there. Oh yeah, it is. For me, it's 400. No, thank you. It must have been a limited print or something. That is ludicrous. Ah, well, what can you do? Maybe they'll print it again, I'm sure, if they sold enough copies. It's just people trying to make money now on things that are in limited print. Cool. All right. So we kind of hopefully spend some time with it, understand sort of where we're going to go with some of our shapes. And now we want to kind of start to plan how we're going to build it. So in Photoshop, obviously the layers are a really great way of separating in environments, foreground, middle ground, background, and every kind of nuance in between, like a deep foreground that moves into a middle ground and so on. So if I were to think about that, if I want to kind of maximum control over these things, whoops. Yeah, Google Images are going to be just an easier way of doing that, a cheaper way. I'm going to think about these as elements that I might want to bring into their own, even like groups, layer groups. And so let's just delete the cloud stuff that we did. So the foreground is going to be one that's obviously closer to us. So I'm going to deal with that. That's going to stack up on top of the next layer, which I think will be the trees in the foreground. So I'll just kind of number these. This layer back here was going to be my layer, third plane. I'd probably work with maybe the valley bottom in here as a fourth, and then I feel like this plane in here would be my fifth. Okay, this in here, just to keep it simple and broken up, I might make that 6, 7, 8 back there. 9, I'm going to fit on top of everything. That'd be the clouds. So for this, I feel like, especially if you're dealing with a client and you're working up some environment stuff like this, I want to be able to be organized of the way I'm working with that stuff, and not kind of haphazardly paint this just all in one go on one layer, right? Sometimes that's fine, but if you're doing your own kind of painting. But as soon as somebody needs to give you feedback or has the opportunity to give you feedback, painting all in one layer where things are harder to shift, because then you'd have to go in and isolate individual pixels with, say, your marquee selection tool. It's just time consuming, right? Unnecessarily time consuming. And so you want to have a little bit more forethought about the way you're setting up your file for the commercial art aspect of things, right? So I would say there, just make sure that you planning it. Like, it wouldn't have to be that you would, if you were doing this exact thing, that you'd break things up exactly how I did. But I know that I maybe want to be tweaking those things a little bit separately because of, say, something like atmospheric perspective, where the values in the darker end start to become more washed out as more of that atmosphere gets lit up as we travel back in space. So we have an idea of that. I mean, right away we can start to block this out. Now I can do this right on top of the image, right? I'm kind of almost tracing in that regard. Or I can have this image off to the side and kind of work with just observationally kind of blocking out similar forms and then being a little bit more freeform with it. I like that option because then I'm not having to be so beholden to the artwork underneath, right? And I get to kind of make some more executive decisions and not be too led by the nose with the information underneath. The reason why that's beneficial to me, or I would say anybody, is that you're going to be designing more, right? You're going to be designing more instead of just translating, right? I talk to my students about this when creating, if you're going to be drawing a picture of a celebrity, which tends to be what people do when they're practicing, I guess, drawing. And I like to use Morgan Freeman for some reason. It's just a good actor. Very kind of memorable face, right? And, I can translate his face from a photograph to a drawing and learn not much, really. right? I've learned to like make sure that this looks like that, and not be thinking about the shapes um, the bones in the face, or the muscles in the face, or any of the volumes in the face. What the skin texture looks like, where the wrinkles go, what they look like, right? How to make that whenever I want. Instead, I just go, yeah, that's that. This is that. Okay, that looks the same. And what have I really remembered from that? It's not to say that that's a bad way of working, but you really need to, or you should be wanting to engage your brain a little bit more in terms of what you're looking at and what you're drawing. So for me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my pure ref open on my other screen, and I'm going to be just looking at this, and I'm going to paint it on my own, right? So it will by the end look different, but we're going to be heavily influenced by this. So that's the idea there. So let's get into it. I'm going to turn that guy off for now. We're going to get rid of this. And for myself, I can start with white as a background. Problem with that is that it's not really that functional for me to have a white backdrop when I'm looking at a piece like this. There's a lot of green, a lot of kind of darker values. I might start with something that's maybe one of those distant cool values or something in there, just as a ground, right? Because it's going to be a lot better if I miss any angles or don't paint anything in for whatever reason. I miss a little spot, that the backdrop is going to catch that stuff. I mean, I can always go in and fix those kinds of issues, but why not just make it a color that's a little bit better for the majority of what we're producing in there, rather than white. Okay, so I could even kind of color pick that, and I'm just going to kind of fill that in. So that's our background. I'm just going to double click that and lock it as our backdrop. And I'm going to be diligent about naming my layers this time. So background. And then we'll open up our pure ref, where I've got the same picture. I've got some Ivan Earl images. I've got some other kind of simplification of forms like trees and rocks and that kind of thing. So I'm not going to show it because of content restrictions on Twitch, where we get the stream pulled down if we're showing other people's stuff without their permission. So just the idea there would be to go and find reference for maybe the stylization that you're after, right? If it's, I've got some Ivan Earl, and I've got some where it's a little bit more stylized than that, even, or simplified than that. Some of it's also not as kind of restricted to the shapes that Ivan Earl uses. Sort of like if I'm drawing a deciduous tree or a leafy tree, it's not just going to be a round circle, right? Ivan got into some pretty intense simplifications of those shapes, and they become very graphic. I don't quite want to get there, so I also filled my my reference sheet with other options, so I kind of have something to look at and bounce my ideas off of there. Okay, so we're looking at that, and I'm just going to kind of set up some shapes in here. So I'm going to start. Let's get rid of this text, and I'll put a folder up there for reference, and then put our shot in there. I like to label these things just so I know which, like, sort of at a glance, where my reference folder is and where everything else is. So let's start with just that simple shape. I'm going to name this the foreground. I'm going to make it just simplification of those words. I know what that means, FG. So if it's confusing to you, make sure you type it all perfectly. So we've got something to the effect of this shape in the foreground. So the linear marquee tool, or sorry, the marquee selection tool is a good one to start with. For me, I'm just going to kind of get in there in a roundabout kind of way with that shape. So I've got it selected. One of the things that I can do at this point, I can just kind of like paint bucket tool that shape in there. But one of the kind of nice things about this is I can actually grab a textured paintbrush and kind of stroke in some texture on the edge, and that might start to break up that form a little bit. And since we're going to be breaking up the layers, then that would exist on top of the underlying layers. So I'll show you what I mean by that. We've got like a scumble brush in here. You can see sort of I can paint that texture in there. And if I let go, let's actually go back a little bit. I kind of painted too opaque up to the edge, so I'm going to kind of do this, and then I'm really going to kind of let that break up a bit by the time we get to that far edge. And so it's not a perfect edge, but we get sort of a summation of it. I could also just hand paint up to that edge in there. It's going to be a separate layer, so if I wanted to come back later, take the linear marquee or the marquee tool and delineate some grass edges or some, take a bite out of some of it so it doesn't feel like such a rigid form, then I can do that. I always have the option to do that now that it is going to be on a separate layer. So, but I'm just trying to block that in there. The next layer would be the trees. So we know from the reference that those were a little bit darker kind of green. All of this stuff can change, so we're not going to fret about it. We'll go FG trees. And I'm going to kind of get that going from where I kind of imagine that shape traveling. So you might just kind of have that pinch down in here. So that goes in behind, so that's really easy. All right. Then the next layer would be the cliffs in the back. So we'll just call those. I'm going to go to middle ground, MG cliffs. Drop that down below. And those are a bit dimmer, a lot more blue involved in them, but not as much dark value in there. So we had that really nice sweep. So this kind of comes out here, and then I get that edge, and then I can kind of bring that into that plunging shape that kind of ends down at the valley bottom in there. Okay, going to erase a little bit of that to that edge. The eraser is a good one as well. I'll go back to my foreground and I can kind of make that all chopped up if I want. Same as the middle ground. I'm going to be starting to populate some more details on top of that, so I'm not worried about that at that point. Okay, valley bottom. Middle ground. Valley bottom. Saving myself all sorts of time. Not really. Okay, pick some of that. I'm going to kind of make that a bit weaker down in that valley bottom there. And I'll pop the image back on in a minute so you can kind of see what I'm thinking about with some of this. Got the eraser tool selected. Oops. So I'm kind of just working with the grass, those grass shapes that I wanted in that space, trying to make those shapes more interesting. I might grab my selection tool and start to kind of create those descending sort of fingers of trees, but more so the grass underneath them first, right? So kind of find where that feels good and then sweep up into those spaces. And then just paint on top of that. Switch that selection so I can delete some of that stuff I painted outside of that frame. So not looking like much yet, right? I talked about this before in terms of, you know, when you're building up a scene, you don't want to be too hard on yourself if it's not looking like anything yet. Like, have some patience with it and let it come to fruition. Um, you can always pivot later and make those things work a little bit better when you spend some time kind of revising it. So no worries there. Starting to kind of, in terms of what we're looking at, let's just actually pop that back up, the reference. Move that to the top. Turn him on. Right, so I'm kind of working with some of the grass in here. There's really beautiful kind of sweeping curves in there that I'm seeing, or that I'm electing to kind of draw in there, and then have that coming in through there. So that's basically what I'm seeing when I do that. You notice it's not the same. I'm not worried about it, right? This is my version of it. So that's what we're up to in there. Yeah, art books. Man, one of my students just bought the new Last of Us 2 art book. I haven't bought it. I probably won't. I don't really have room for them anymore. I'd have to start getting rid of some of those. And I could probably stand to cycle some of those out, but it's just a expensive, space-consuming hobby. And I kind of treat it more of like just a material kind of collection thing. Like, I love having the book more than I love reading it. I mean, I'll read all of my books, or I'll leaf through them, right? But I just like having them. So I know that that's a problem, so I stopped doing it. Okay, let's get back to the artwork. So we've got that layer, the valley bottom. What might be good now is I can start to layer some of the trees up on top of that. You bought the TEGN art books. Nice. Awesome. Okay. So we'll fold that up. So this is the layer that is the grass underneath. So that's kind of further back. So up on top of that, I'll create middle ground, tree, valley BT for the valley bottom. And I'll actually take a look at that again. See kind of where those trees kind of end. It looks like there's this slab of rock that's there, and then those trees maybe start to try and climb up it. So we will maybe, I'll get the foreground trees kind of painted on top of that. I'm going to try that again. Trying to cut some really nice shapes out of that. If I screw up, I can hit my shift key and just try again and just kind of continue to add to it. I'm really just setting myself up again to be able to have a base so that I can come back later and actually put some actual kind of treetops in there. Kind of smooths into the back, and I'll just paint that real quick. And we'll get those other guys down in here going on. So even with those little spikes of the tree as they climb up the mountainside, I want those to be varied and interesting as well. So um, I'm trying to make them interesting and moving in different directions. Not everything is sweeping up onto that cliff face evenly. Already shaping up, at least in my opinion. That's what matters here. Oh, get that guy. Again, you don't have to use the selection tool. The reason I'm using it is it just gives me a nice razor sharp edge when I paint on top of it. And I want that look, right? But you can just hand paint those things. Use a masking tool or an eraser, right, to get the edge the way you want it to look. But I feel like that's fine. I might kind of go back into my valley bottom and just kind of paint in the underside of that. And now we kind of go up here. So I'm gonna start painting the cliff face. So we'll go. I think we can safely call that like a background at this point. BG cliff left, just left frame. And so I'm looking at the original here, kind of looking at this formation. It seems fairly straight, at least the striations through the cliff. I kind of don't want the cliff volume to be a straight edge to follow that. I want to feel like it's maybe some sort of eroded space that has cracked or been eroded. The face has been kind of sheared off, and then we get those straight lines. So I might want to still follow a bit of a curve at the top of that and maybe kind of generalize some of this up and through here so that we can contrast those straight edges that we'll put in. Okay. So get this maybe right here where that climbs up. I'll get this form that kind of maybe snakes up this way. And I'm going to just grab we'll kind of grab this like purple, desaturated purple white. See how that paints in a little bit. A little bit too saturated, so I'm going to go and just take some more saturation out of that. Maybe darken that by a hint. I'm gunning for separation between these layers at this point, and because they're broken up into their own layers, I can go and tweak that later. So if my lighting, if my color doesn't feel perfect at the moment, I can tweak that. Okay, so we've got kind of this interesting meandering cliff all the way up to the top. So in behind that, we'll build another one. For some of you, being this organized about the layer structure can maybe be a bit tedious. So, hey, if you want to do it a different way, it's up to you. That's the great thing about art and artists having their different workflows. That's what makes everybody's artwork interesting, at least to me. Grab a bit of that, take some bite out of that. Brighten that up a little bit as that climbs up into that part of the mountain. Okay. And we'll get some of that back section going on. we've got this little bowl that's happening in the up in here, right, that I want to kind of pull out of there. So what I might do is I might just start a shape that I want to preserve as a way of kind of building around that. So let's go BG bowl, so we know what that is, and then I can kind of get in there and have that shape sweep through. We'll make it so aggressively bright. So that's feeling not too bad. Maybe we'll take now a little bit of that mountain. Well, let's build a mountain on top of that. So we'll place that layer on top, BG. We'll say distant mountain. I think it's always good to learn other people's techniques, to try them out yourself and see what you like, what works for you. Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big proponent of art being fun to do, especially if you're doing it in a commercial setting. Because if you hate the work that you're doing, you might as well be doing something else, right? Well, even then, I'd probably still rather do art, but if you love it and it's not fun for you because of a workflow that you feel trapped in, I would try and find another way out of that, right? Because you want there to be some passion, I would think. So people actually start to read that in your work, read the passion. Okay, so we'll get this other little mountain that seems to be kind of like poking out here. And then that one kind of sweeps up this way and then kind of comes down here. We'll meet with that. I'm not going to break the cliffs up anymore. I'm just going to use that general shape. So this is where I'm starting to kind of make that executive decision of no longer kind of being pedantic about breaking up those forms. So that feels pretty good. We get a little bit of a bump as we move into that mountain. I'm going to drop another layer, BG. Distant mount 2. Another reason for labeling these, and some of you know, but like I can just mouse over any part of this and control right click, and it'll show me which layers are underneath my my mouse. And then I can just very quickly pick that. MG Cliffs and BG, right? BG is something that's at the far back. And so I can click that, and then I'm down there and working on that at that point, right? So if we just have layer 1, 2, 3, 1000, right? We won't know which one we're picking, or we won't have a good idea. You'll be able to pick it, and then you have to kind of go and turn it on and off to see which one that actually is, right? So the tiny amount of time it takes you to actually label your layers is huge, right? So do it. Okay, so we got kind of that background valley. I'm gonna shoot in one more layer of that distant mountain. Let's go back to the top. This guy in here, this section, and I'll keep that all as one section of the painting instead of breaking that up as well. Okay, so have a little bump. Let's go find that guy. So I want it to be on top of this shape, so I'll start one on top of there. Distant mountain, that'll be my mountain 3. So 1, 2, 3. So I'm kind of shortening it here even more, so I might go back through there. If I was submitting this to client, I'd just make it more uniform. But I feel like MT is enough for me at this point. So I'll give it a little bump, and we're seeing in there, and then this interesting sweep. Try that again. My Cintiq moved on me. There we go. Pick this, brighten it up a little bit more. Have that be that distant shape. Okay, so that's feeling pretty good. The clouds maybe be the next thing I would work with. So those can be pretty fun with even the marquee selection tool. So maybe get these. Those are going to go on top of the bowl, and I want that to be on top of distant mountain, because if we look at the original, we see that they're kind of tracking over top. So, and I want that to be able to, maybe I'll use a mask or an eraser to break through to the mountain underneath. Otherwise, sitting on top of everything, I would just shear off whenever I feel like the mountain's coming through like that, with, by erasing that as well. So let us put that up on top. I'm just going to name it clouds because that's what we're going to be painting. I can, at this point, if I have multiple layers of clouds, I can go 1, 2, 3. But, and which I might do later if I want to kind of get some depth within those, but I just want to kind of block it out now and take a look at overall at the shapes, and kind of I am completely just blocking things out. I'm not worried about the details yet. So clouds, let's get that guy out of our face. And I'm just going to kind of get that going in here, and then start creating some of those forms. Nice sharp shape on that. Look at these guys. I'm going to try and make it feel like it's wrapping up over top of that mountain. So kind of get them swinging through there. Try that again. That's a nice big one on top of that. Actually, I might as well at this point throw in some more clouds as a layer, right? Cloud 2. And then move those guys even further in the background, so I can mask them a little bit better. Won't necessarily be able to see a huge difference right now because of the values that I selected, but again, I can change that later. Not worried about it. Okay, so that's feeling not bad. some things that we can definitely tune in here, but we're getting a sense of some of the shapes in the valley that maybe we'll be using. So it's a good start. Just kind of let's take a look back at this. Quite different. It's easier to see our shapes now, which is the point. The colors and the values I am definitely going to change, but that's sort of feeling pretty good. The bowl is going to be something that I kind of start to paint into as well once we get to it. But there we go. It's a good start. The one spot that I need to maybe spend a bit more time on is that valley bottom, because I have the idea for that river to flow through. So I am going to go to that. That'll be valley bottom here. I'll probably put that in between valley tree bottom and valley bottom. So new layer, river. And I'm going to kind of try and make some interesting shape here. Like the shapes of the clouds, yeah. I mean, it's can have a lot of fun with that, right? And kind of make them very rhythmic and tapered and pinched, right? To make that feel good. So that's underneath there. Not really digging this M shape that I've got, so might actually try that again. That to come to here. My tree stand's gonna have to move a little bit, but doesn't feel too bad. Okay. I could get into the cliff face up in here. This guy, cliff top, and pop in some I'm gonna call that cliff left faces, and play with how some of those things are coming through. I feel like you still want that to feel like these things are reaching up into the sky. I'll use a very similar value though. Some of that lower stuff. There, yeah, the hut we were at when we took this picture, it was funny because there's obviously a lot of Swiss and German hikers because it's close to the border of Germany. But then you could pick out the American and Canadian tourists for sure. And this one group we ran into, this one couple had been there for hours hoping to get nice weather, but it was terrible when they got there, and they had spent a bunch of money in the little hut on beer and sausages so they could basically loiter and wait for the weather to get better. It was pretty funny. They were not hungry at all, or they didn't want beer, but they knew they had to kind of pay so that they weren't just taking up space. But it worked out in the end, so they were pretty happy. That was a funny instance though. I feel like there's rocky outcroppings there, and I want those to feel interesting. I feel like if those things maybe follow a little bit of a almost like a tangent of some of the sharp shape up at the top, that might be a little bit better for us. So kind of sweeping down into here. All right, so maybe I get the odd little cliff face popping off of that. So when that cliff face itself, I might actually go into this guy and chew a little bit off of the top of that to make that part of it a bit more interesting. So can do is maybe cut some striations out of here. Make that kind of maybe feel like it's rolling over top. These little slivers. So we're starting to get into a little bit more of the medium detail now. Blocking those shapes out. At this point, I'm kind of just deciding what I want, right? I'm looking at my reference, but I don't care to translate directly that kind of thing. I'm kind of making a summation of what I'm seeing and picking out shapes that would be similar and maybe more interesting to me to put in here to be able to describe what it is we're looking at. So is that we've got this guy. At this point, I could put in some darker BG cliff left. I'll go texture. And I just kind of want to, I'm going to build this in just because they are going to be more major forms, but they're the kind of medium forms now. So I can start to kind of play with what that'll look like. Even kind of come up to this guy up here. And we'll make that a little bit. We can make it lighter, darker. I might go with just darker for now, just to see what that what those shapes could start to feel like in there. Photoshop work for a second. So that doesn't look too bad. Gives us the sense of the contour of that shape. I could make that a little bit more of a contour as it kind of follows through in the each sort of rounded peak and valley, so to speak, of the way that cliff sticks out into space. One of the things I don't want to do is start to get into too much of the realistic way of representing this, or the photorealism, right? If the texture, as I've laid out there, feels believable enough, then that's where I want to kind of leave it for now. At least I can always, at the end, if I deem it to be too simple for the stylization that I'm going for, then I could come back and tweak that. So works for me. I can make that a clipping layer as well, so, or a clipping mask, and it will clip to only that layer. The problem with that is I started to paint it up on top of this guy as well, so it's not speaking to the cliff faces left. So I could always just collapse that down before I do that. So turn that back on. We'll turn that clip off, release clipping mask, and then I'm just going to combine these two so they're that whole set, and then I can apply a clipping mask to that. Okay, so I mean, at this point, do I want to go into some of those other cliff faces and get a little bit of that that striation texture, the formation that's flowing through the broken faces of the cliffs into those other areas. I say, yeah, why not? Let's do it. So we have our distant mountain, this guy, right? So I'll start a new one. We'll go texture. Just add, copied the tag and then added to it. And then, so I'm going to be paying attention to the scale of that striation. As it moves away, if it's a similar thickness of the formation, right? In perspective, it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. If I make it the same size at this point, it's going to feel like it's flattening that depth, right? So I want to be cognizant of how thick in general these things are and make them thinner as we move further back. So be a bit more careful to make sure that those guys are thin. May not even detect the texture by the time we get to the furthest mountain. And I'm just going to make that a hint darker. So get something like that, and then we'll just clip that to the bottom shape. And that feels not bad. Yeah, pretty happy with that so far. I do want to get back into that bowl and give it a little bit of loving because it's kind of just flat and we're not getting much of the sense of the sweeping kind of bowl shape to it. Doing right. Enjoying a chilled evening. More learning. Excellent. Welcome. Okay, so I'm just gonna. I mean, I'm looking at the image all the time, but I'll remember to kind of show you guys. There's a little bit of textural detail in the back there. It's, the clouds are creating a shadow in that valley bowl. So that's why we're not getting too much information as it kind of fades up against the valley bowl wall. I know it's hard to see it there. I remember what it was like. So that's an extra benefit for me, but we can see that a little bit of that's poking out because that the clouds are breaking, letting some of that light through. So that's what I'm thinking in there. So we got the texture up. I might be able to kind of start to get that going on. Select some of this, make it a hint lighter, just so we can differentiate back there. It's a good rough approximation of some detail. I might actually grab that and bring some of these little slivers out a bit more. Yeah, it feels pretty good for now. I mean, it's a very general sense of what's happening there. But it works for me. The only other thing is that we have these trees skirting the valley at the base all the way along, except for this distant mountain in here. So I think I'm just going to pop some of that tree detail in there. So we're getting enough layers now that I'm just going to start resorting to my control right click. See my distant mountain. I can put my distant MT tree. And we can start to pull out those trees back there. I'm leading this one tree up because I want to make this, let's start a new layer just so I can sketch on top. Call it markup. I kind of want to make this a volume eventually, this little rocky outcropping in here. So the trees, I want them to feel like they're tucking up in behind that. So I'm setting myself up for that later. The striations might still be something that I might put in here, at least in the meantime, on that distant mountain, because it just feels so naked, right? It feels the shape's too graphic right now. So mountain 3 texture. And we'll just go in there and do the same thing. So if it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, then this is really going to be like slivers at this point. So I want to barely have that be something that we can see. Any of them get too big on us, and we know we can go back and kind of erase or mask, whatever you like. Whatever you like. I'm kind of almost now, I'm just kind of scribbling in the same direction because I won't follow the exact same line, and that will open up just this sliver of that texture. Okay. Color pick that, make it a hint darker again, and we'll hit that. Let Photoshop think, and we get this kind of base texture back there. At least it's a start. I don't love it, but it's almost like a marker for us to know what's happening back there. Valley bottom, we don't have any grass there. That's sort of just still stone. So above that, I'll copy that again. Make a new layer, just in mountain 3 grass. And then I'm just gonna kind of select that. Because it's underneath the tree, I don't need to select anything. I can just paint, pick that, and then make that a bit brighter. So it feels like it's moving back there. So yeah, I mean, for my purposes, it's feeling not too bad. One of the things I might do as just a last little hit is close that bowl up with those clouds. So we've got multiple cloud sets. So let's go find those clouds. There's clouds 2. I'm going to go clouds 3. Move that down below. And I will fill it up with just some last shapes in there. So even with those last shapes, I want to consider what's already laid down. This will be in behind. It'll be on top of the mountain, so I will have to kind of just skirt that. But I'll make shapes that intersect and give me a nice clean nice clean overlaps with the that's too similar value. Nice clean overlaps with the existing clouds. So some of this negative space in here is still a shape, especially in a 2D format. So you want to be kind of considering that, not only the positive shape, but the negative shape. If we were remembering, if you guys were around for this week's life drawing, we did that. We looked at the model, we looked at subject matter, and just drew the negative space around it. That helps us understand sort of to look for that kind of thing when we're doing observational drawing. So we get those things right, but also that those negative spaces, those negative shapes are still shapes, right? In in a composition. So you want those to be interesting, right? So I don't really want to close this shape up because I really like how that opens up into this larger kind of rhythm and then pinches and then moves down into this really interesting rhythm. So I'm pretty happy with that. If anything, we'll keep that if we make those clouds darker, right? So I'm kind of in between wanting to put something else in here. Let's see if that works. Just to hem in that shape. Maybe I'll leave it like that for now, just to see how I feel about that in time. But there we go, right? Like that's one of the ways we can build a basic sense of a scene in here. Now I do want to go tweak this guy. These trees are encroaching on my river too much. So I'm just going to go and grab my eraser and chop some of that out of there. So I want those trees to be on that one side, and then this valley will swing out from and behind that. I'm probably still going to put trees up in the foreground in here. So we're all the way at the foreground. Get some of these trees coming in here like this as they disappear down the mountain, right? Right, just as a nice overlap. So, but that's why I built those basic shapes. It's like that's where I'm going to build those trees out of, and I want them to follow in a very general way, follow that sweeping shape, right? So not everything's going to just stay this very graphic form, although it could, right? There's a certain aesthetic emerging out of this, which is very simplified, very graphic, which could be what you're after. Maybe you just go into those individual forms and play with some of the volume, light them a little bit, and that's your representation of the valley as you see it. For me, no, that's not what I'm going to do. I want to bring in just a little bit more, well, maybe a lot more detail at that point. But I wanted to get to this rough approximation of those forms to see how they look now. So when we look back at our ref, we kind of see what inspired us and see how we've changed things. There's no rule that we can't go back and change them and mold them differently. But at this point, that's when you would do that, right? For me, I'm happy with it. Feels pretty good. Yeah, I think I can deal with that. I might actually, I like kind of what's happening of these upper planes of this close cliff here, sweeping and rounding around the corner of that cliff. I might kind of just follow suit with some of that just coming into the shape here. I'll show you what I mean. Go to cliff faces and I'll grab some more of that. And I'm just going to kind of follow this in here and sweep that up in this direction. Kind of get that kind of moving down that way. I could even do more of that down here. Making those things kind of feel like they're sweeping down and falling off to the lower section. I'm not so hot over this kind of rounded edge because it feels like the rest of the edge of the cliff has sheared. This feels like it's kind of rolled off. So I could go in there at that point and follow that to be a little bit more sharp. Get a bit closer to that. And just do something like this. Then we'll grab the cliff top, and then I'll just swing some of that out just to the tip of that, and then back. Maybe we could even carve a little bit out of that so it feels like it's opening up to us a bit. Grab that, fill that in. And I am just going to delete some of that rock face. So that sweeps out a little bit more, and now it kind of feels like that other cliff is in behind it. Might do some similar work on that back there, that distant mountain. That's all one, right? So maybe we got a little bit lazy on that, but it's such a small sliver, I think, that I can work with that. No matter what I need to kind of apply to it. Starting with CG Spectrum next week. Awesome. Super, super excited. Excellent. Glad to have you. Someone else is starting. Yes, we know who that is. And I'm glad to hear your art improved. Retake the course. Wow, that's big praise. Okay, so yeah, we've got that. We've got our lazy mountain, right? And so the easier way of kind of dealing with that is just to start another layer and clip, just like the texture we have clipped in here. I'm just going to kind of come in here and maybe do some of that. I'm going to take a page out of my own book with some of the cliff top stuff up here and try and inject that into that distance space as well. So have it maybe kind of round around the corner. And I can use the edge to make it a contrast between the stone and the grass and the foreground, or the kind of closer middle ground cliff. Have that come in here, just streak through there. And then we'll see that edge a little bit more clearly, right? Do I want to keep going with a lot of detail in there? Not so much. I don't want to kind of start to make this super noisy in the background, and it could risk doing that, right? From there, one of the things that we are seeing in the original reference is the cliff drop. So we get kind of probably a lot of erosion, creating these craggy crevices or vertical striations. So that would cross over our kind of more angular horizontal striations, and that's not formation. That's just erosion on the cliff face, right? So that could be something that I do bring in over top, just to make that feel like it's dropping down. And then in that case, I might start to follow some of these these bands of trees upwards. So let's actually get down in there and start hanging out with that. Cliff faces, we have our texture, so we want this to affect everything. So this layer that I'm going to be putting in is going to go over top of that. And I can make that a clipping mask as well. So let's just let's play around and see what that might look like, right? Just kind of starting to create some of these edges, sweep up from those trees. Let's see how that looks. We'll grab something that's maybe a bit darker. See if this gives us the effect we're after. Yeah, not bad. Not 100% on it, but I feel like that at least gives us some of that contour, that sort of shift in direction of the cliff. Pretty happy with that. So we'll just go through and maybe find a couple other places we can do that. think it works. Starting to work anyway. All right. So do we put that into some of those other spots? I think at least in the that second, the lazy mountain. Well, we'll pop that in there. Okay, let's go find that. So we got that texture. We'll pop another one in there and make sure that that's a clipping mask. That'll be our vertical. Vertical texture. Name it whatever you'll remember. Thinking again of maybe making sure that those edges don't get too big so that they flatten that texture because they seem the same size as the stuff that's closer to us. We don't want that. Yeah, I feel like that's gonna work for now. Trees maybe need a little bit of loving right there. I'm going to just cut that out. Have that sweep up into here. And then I want that to follow in behind. So I'm just gonna kind of lead that up through there. Aha, so that's a little bit of a problem. I don't want that tree set to be kind of moving up into that part of the valley the way it is. That should be, this group of trees should be with Lazy Mountain. So what I'm gonna do is kind of cut them out. And we'll go find Lazy. And I'm going to put those on top of Lazy Mountain. Let's paint that in there. This mountain has sort of some interesting little artifacts that are sticking up off of it, so I can go quickly clean that up. Just erase that out. And then let's go find those trees again. Lazy trees. Having fun with them. I don't want them to be this light, so I'll select that and just make them a little bit darker. Make sure I lock the pixels on that. There we go. Maybe a hint darker. Just so we see the breakup of that. Mountain itself, I am going to fix that little bit in there, and voila. Other things I might do, I know I started drawing the trees down in here, kind of got ahead of myself on that, but that's fine. I can easily delete it, right? Because we've separated everything into their constituent layers. So the original shot just had kind of this grass rolling down in here. I kind of want to put a pathway or something in there just to kind of help us lead the eye back into the composition instead of just having that big naked slope. So with that, I might kind of think about a pathway cut in. Moving down. Grab some dirt color. Oops, okay, that goes on top of everything up here. There's our trees. We'll steal that layer. So it's sort of like the idea is that the pathways cut into this hillside. You'll see how I kind of finesse that. So the hillside's going to come down, and you'll have to dig out of it to actually get that feeling like it's carved out of the hillside. So maybe that'll be just a bit of a darker representation. Let me just hand paint some of this. Keep it a bit more organic. And then I'll go back down into our foreground and I'll just paint the edge of that pathway kind of coming out of the ground there. So sort of like we imagine we can meander down in through there. Through the tree line. Let's shape these guys up a little bit more. Our cliffs now, these guys that are hiding right here, middle ground cliffs, those could have some MG cliff top. I'm gonna clip that. Get some of the light falling down on top of that. Create a clipping mask. And I'm just gonna, using what we got, have this feel like it's spilling up over top. Get some of this green, maybe a little bit less intense. And we can have a little bit of that stuff kind of peeking up underneath. Like so. That'll work for now. Some of those shapes I don't love, but maybe we'll have that kind of fall off down below. Good start anyway, right? And then I'm reserving this big rounded part for more trees, right? Which we'll take a look at starting to build now. So we've got the basis for everything. When I'm looking at trees, we know that say a coniferous tree, like a pine tree or whatever, it will have the trunk, branches. At the end of those branches, we'll get smaller and smaller detail, and we'll get the needles, say, of a pine tree. If I'm creating that look with a brush, you know, I've got this specific brush selected here, which is the tree scumble. And, whoops. And with this specific texture, let's go all the way to the top. I am going to delete those trees though. Let's get these guys out of here. We stole that layer for our pathway. Path 1, path 2. Okay, and I'm just going to start another layer, which is going to be FG trees. So the brush that I've got selected here, I've selected because of the texture that it's laying down has almost like this. If we zoom in on that, almost like this texture that's very similar to what we would see in the individual little canes of the branch where the needles stick off of them, right? So the idea to create a tree in a very simple way in that kind of Ivan Earl tradition would be that I can, and let's just kind of open up a space here like this, is I can create that general shape, and then when I go in there to paint the actual trees, I can leave a little bit of that texture near the edge, right? And not have that be something that is completely filled in, right? So various different ways to achieve that look, right? Maybe I can kind of brush from the core. I could always get in there if I'm detailing individual trees. I could get in there and actually be drawing some of the detail of those branches, right, as they come out to the edge. And when I deselect, we kind of get a simplification of that. Alternatively, I can add to that by grabbing a textural brush and chewing away at some of the detail on the outer edges of that, just to make it feel a bit more believable, right? And we can go through that and hit different shapes, different angles, right? Making this feel like those trees are moving out into the distance there. I might decide to kind of have that hillside be a little less aggressive in dropping down. I might kind of arc it out this way a bit more, because I want to use some of that as an overlap for those trees that are disappearing over the horizon. But the idea would be, I'm just going to grab something even darker than this. That would be the idea with some of these things in here, right? Getting those kind of interesting textural forms coming out of that. I can start with that. I can kind of filter in some texture on top of those to make it feel like they're being lit up, right? Which is pretty cool. And it's not taking me a lot of effort to make that texture. We're keeping those shapes. Again, I can go in there with the eraser and maybe break up some of that if I want. Maybe find a looser texture than that to chip away at some of those forms. Come in there and actually just erase some of that. I could use the selection tool to kind of grab some of that and just delete, right, to make those forms. So yeah, I mean, it was similar to the way we built the cliffs and everything. That's the way I'm going to start to affect some change on those. So but let's before we start getting into that, let's fix that slope, the old FG slope. So I'm kind of focusing, let's get rid of that selection. This shape in here is nice and tapered. We can just embellish that a lot more by having that maybe swing down this way and then up into that slope. So we kind of got that sweep down into the valley down below. The trees, I can erase up to that edge. Gonna kind of just block that one tree in there. So as we move across this guy in here, right, the trees will be closer to us and they'll move further away. So they're going to get bigger to smaller. Now I can hand paint those. I can create a brush where I create a specific tree brush in the style that I'm painting, right? So the way to do that would be to file new, and I'd pick a maybe 2500 by 2500 pixel brush setup. That's the maximum size of a brush file. And then I can create that tree shape, right? So it might be something where I create this form. I can use that texture that I set up with the tree scumble. So I'd be playing with this to get that feeling approximately correct. I can, maybe we'll zoom out a little bit from there. Let's try that again. make my texture really big. See if that's a bit better. The core of that tree. Just want to disrupt that edge a bit more. So it's not perfect. And anything that's obviously white is going to be see-through. Anything that's gray is going to be translucent. Anything that's black is going to be opaque, right? So, so yeah, I mean, this is just a rough setup for a brush. I can go File, Edit, Define Brush Preset, Tree. And so we've got our tree there. It's not, as I paint with it, it's going to be sampled as a default brush. So I need to actually go in there and put the spacing out a little bit more if I'm going to be using this to paint a whole bunch of trees. And I do want to play with a few more of the shape dynamics. So the size jitter, I don't want them all to be the same size. Minimum diameter, we can play with it a little bit. Angle jitter is nice because not all those trees maybe will be growing perfectly straight up, which I like. Roundness jitter, maybe some of them are a bit stumpier, right? We're going to flip X, not Y, because that's going to make sure that they're upside down, right? So some of them are going to, the texture is going to flip back and forth. And I can set this to pen pressure so that the harder I press, the bigger they get. The lighter I press, the smaller they get. So quite a bit of control there. I'm pretty happy with that. The scatter, I don't really want them to scatter too much because as I paint with that stroke, it'll look a little bit strange. But I could set my count jitter to pen pressure so that the harder I press, the more those things kind of overlap. I'm pretty happy with the way it is right now. And then, of course, you could set a specific texture, paper texture, other kind of scumble texture to it at that point in there. So that's the way I would work that. If I'm happy with this, you always want to make sure that you save that brush. So I'll call it tree 1 or tree real, just so that's the real tree version. You can include the color. I would just not click that because you sometimes want to have that color picked already and not include it. And I leave the brush size is not captured. So just the tool settings, okay. And now when I go into my brush selection, it's down there, real tree. Tree is our original. If I am happy with my new one, I can delete the old one because that's just the original tree preset. So now we've got that tree brush, right? We come back into our other file. Let's just save that. Valley, good enough. And I can then start to use this to paint, right? And actually, I probably want that to still be like upright in there. So test it out. I might need to tweak this actually a little bit. The tree width in the brush tip sheets may be a bit big for what I want now that I'm looking at this. But I can start to kind of paint those trees along that edge, right? And we can get some of those being closer and closer so I can kind of build up the texture of these, right? And have them sit in behind one another and build that as we kind of roll over that mountain. So the downside of this is that I don't kind of get, I like the shapes being selected because I can paint that scumble texture in on top with different lighting. So I might use a brush like this just to kind of filter in some of the far distant trees. Like so on this one here, it might be more useful to get in there and just kind of pepper the top of that to make it feel like that's a texture, a mountain with tree kind of texture on top of it. But I follow that shape at that point, right? And then I can always select and get some texture, other textures involved in that. Maybe we'll just select that and then bump that up by a hint into green. right? We can get some interesting fluctuation in that color, in that value. Maybe amp that up by a hint. Something like that, just to make that feel good. So, like I said, there's a little bit of trial and error with that to get that looking the way you want, right? But we've isolated all of that stuff, and I can keep that locked, the alpha lock on that, and then kind of skim over top with some other textural strokes in there. Okay, so food for thought. Now, we're running out of time, so I'm going to wrap it up there. But I mean, we can try this on our own, right? Like, you guys can get in there and start to kind of block these things out. We're looking at that reference, and we're kind of thinking about the way we want our piece to come through. I'm simplifying some of those forms, thinking about exaggerating some of them, and making these really beautiful rhythms as they flow through the space, right? Not being super beholden to what it is we're seeing in the original scene. So we'll carry on next week with this. I'll maybe do a little bit of work in between to tune some of the colors, and then we'll come back and continue on building this to create our stylized shot. So it might be kind of just a nice mood shot for some an animated film or a stylized video game, right? So that's the way we'll look at it. Okay. Get into the chat here before I wrap up. Is there any way to do procedural properties for customizing? Okay, yeah. Glad that answered your question. All right, thank you, gang. And again, if you're interested, on Mondays, I stream at the same time on Mondays, 11 to 1 for some life drawing. So that's just to kick off the week. Start thinking about kind of practicing life drawing. We'll be working this week on some angle of alignment stuff with the body. And so maybe we'll see you there. Otherwise, we'll see you next week, hopefully, at the same time to carry on with this. Have a great rest of your week. Good weekend, and we'll see you guys next time. Take care.